February 11th, 2020 regular meeting of the Mentor Exempted Village Board of Education is called. This meeting is being held in accordance with Section 3313.15 of the Ohio Revised Code. Mr. Wilson, will you please call the roll?
Mrs. Briner?
Here.
Mr. Buckley?
Here.
Ms. Jisling?
Present.
Mrs. Roberts?
Here.
Mr. Tuttle?
Here.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Could you please join me in a moment of silence in remembrance of one of our students who passed away recently, Audrey Knipp. Thank you. I would like to welcome everyone to the February 11th, 2020 regular meeting of the Mentor Exempted Village Board of Education. Prior to this evening, each board member has received for their review and consideration the agenda and materials associated with each agenda item for the board's approval via the district's paperless Board of Education agenda system called Board Docs. The public can access the agenda through the school district's website. The agenda is available through the district's website for public viewing the Sunday prior to the board meeting. Board members have the opportunity to call the superintendent and chief financial officer for information concerning agenda items and to request, if needed, additional information. There are two places on the agenda when the board entertains comments from the community. The first hearing of the public is dedicated to those who wish to address the board on agenda items only. The second hearing of the public is dedicated to those who wish to address the board on any subject, whether it is an item on the agenda or another issue. When addressing the board, please state your name. Comments are limited to 3 minutes, and please address questions to the president. This meeting is being televised on a delayed basis and will be shown on the Spectrum Cable, Channel 1026 in Mentor and Channel 1025 in Mentor on the Lake. This meeting is also being videotaped and will be shown on our YouTube channel, Cardinal TV Mentor, Ohio. Please place your mobile telephones on silent mode during the meeting. Next on the agenda is approval of minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Wilson, please call the roll.
Ms. Jisling?
Yes.
Mrs. Roberts?
Yes.
Mrs. Briner?
Yes.
Mr. Tuttle?
Yes.
Mr. Buckley?
Yes. Next on the agenda is hearing of the public on any items on the agenda. Okay, seeing or hearing none. Mr. Porter, Superintendent's report and recommendations.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. President, members of the board. I have the following recommendations listed under the consent agenda and recommend approval of items 6A1 through 6A6.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Wilson, please call the roll.
Ms. Jisling?
Yes.
Mr. Tuttle?
Yes.
Mrs. Briner?
Yes.
Mrs. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Buckley?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. President and members of the board, I am recommending approval of agenda item C1 related to certified personnel and C2 through C6, all related to human resource matters.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Wilson, please call the roll.
Mrs. Roberts?
Yes.
Mrs. Briner?
Yes.
Ms. Jisling?
Yes.
Mr. Tuttle?
Yes.
Mr. Buckley?
Yes.
Thank you. This concludes my portion of tonight's agenda.
Okay, Section 7, Board of Education Report and Recommendations, A, Business.
Yes, we've presented a resolution to the board authorizing us to conduct a public auction of 34 MacBooks, used MacBooks are previously assigned to faculty and support staff because we expect the cumulative value to exceed $10,000. We're required by law to conduct a public auction, so we're asking for permission to do that.
So moved.
Second?
Please call the roll.
Ms. Jisling?
Yes.
Mrs. Briner?
Yes.
Mrs. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Tuttle?
Yes.
Mr. Buckley?
Yes.
I just wanted to say real quickly, when the students went to their one-to-one devices back several years ago, and we had had concerns about whether the kids could handle the responsibility of having a fairly expensive device at their disposal, and, you know, what would those replacement costs be and so forth. I just wanted to say how wonderful it's been that students and staff value those pieces of equipment and care for them, that the damage rate, the loss rate is very low, considering the thousands of devices at play, and I think that's pretty wonderful. That says a lot about our community and our district.
Thank you.
Yes.
Do you have one to add to that?
Yes, we do have an addendum this evening requesting approval of a third addendum of the purchase agreement with Rice Elementary. We're anticipating closing on the property on February 18th. As we were preparing the title for the property, we discovered that the purchaser gave us the long LLC name. They originally submitted their offer and the board approved the sale to 3971 Erie Street Limited Liability Corporation. We were informed that the name of the LLC should be 3941 Erie Street. So our attorneys asked that we approve this third addendum, changing the name of the buyer so that there are no legal technicalities.
So Dan, this is just a name correction only, is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. So moved.
Second.
Mary.
Please call the roll.
Mrs. Briner?
Yes.
Mr. Tuttle?
Yes.
Ms. Jisling?
Yes.
Mrs. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Buckley?
Yes. Next is the legislative report. Mr. Tuttle.
Thank you. So, for February 2020, voucher program application date delayed to April 1st. Just hours before the February 1st deadline, Governor Mike DeWine signed into law Senate Bill 120, which pushes back to April 1st the application window for the Educational Choice Scholarship EdChoice program, Ohio's largest voucher program. The extension gives the legislature time to reach an agreement on how to address the explosion in the number of public schools designated as EdChoice eligible. In fiscal year 2019, that list stood at 255 buildings in 31 districts and will balloon to 1,227 buildings in 426 districts in 2021. Last month, House Speaker Larry Householder and Senate President Larry Obhoff were engaged in negotiations on several voucher solutions that would have implemented short-term fixes to the eligibility list and revised other components of the program. Those talks continued late into January, but ultimately stalled as the February 1st deadline drew near. Lawmakers found themselves forced to move February 1st deadline to April 1st to allow more time for solutions. Concrete efforts to address the voucher issue began to surface only a few weeks ago. No surprise here. The main proposal was offered by Senator Matt Dolan. It would have immediately trimmed the list from 1,227 buildings to 328. Wow, that's drastic. How did they do that? And a reduction of 899 buildings. It also would have increased the income threshold from 200% to 250% of the federal poverty level for the income-based EdChoice expansion program. In addition, it would restrict voucher eligibility to private school districts or homeschooled students who completed 8th grade, if their public school was voucher eligible instead of grades 8 through 11. The plan also would have appropriated $10 million to school districts in FY 2021 to offset losses due to this provision. Another similar amendment also appeared. The newer amendment froze the eligibility to what currently is in law, effectively capping the list at 500 buildings. The amendment also increased the income threshold to 300% of the federally poverty level. Finally, the amendment failed to include an appropriation despite maintaining the 8th grade eligibility provision. And the Senate Higher Education Committee then met on January 29th and amend and pass House Bill 9, which included a similar version to the second amendment. Key differences included trimming the eligibility list down to 420 buildings, a reduction of 807 buildings, and a $20 million appropriation to offset losses due to the 8th grade eligibility provision. Of those 420 buildings, 191 happened to receive an overall grade of A, B, or C on their most recent report card. The amendment also would have dissolved the Academic Distress Commission for the Lorain City School District. The Senate then passed House Bill 9 by a vote of 26-7 with an additional $10 million and a reduction in the voucher payments due from the Cleveland Municipal School District. I'm going to skip a little ahead right here and just, House Speaker reveals House's plan on vouchers. In an interview with reporters, House Holder laid out his chamber's proposal to address the voucher program. First, it would end the performance-based aspect of EdChoice, which uses report cards to determine eligibility, and shift entirely to a state-paid income-based program. Students currently receiving a voucher would be grandfathered into the new system. The speaker also said the income eligibility threshold would be increased to 300% of the federal poverty level, with priority given to the lowest income students. And there are several other features that I won't read into this, but I would ask Mr. Wilson and Superintendent Porter to provide comment and input.
Sure, thank you. This has been a complicated issue for the last several months, and I think until at least April 1st, it will continue to be complex. There are many different proposals out there, or versions of proposals with some overlap and in some cases some unique features. The I guess, version or the proposal that aligns best with our thinking comes from the Alliance for High Quality Education, the schools, and that's a group we belong to that represent 75 high-performing districts around the state who, in one way or another, resemble us in terms of sort of makeup and so forth. The main takeaways out of this that the Alliance, is pushing for is reducing the number of buildings on that eligibility list. Most of the proposals do that one way or another. All of the proposals that I saw would remove all of our schools from the list. So that, that would be certainly a step in the right direction. Or totally even eliminating the EdChoice based on the school report card, because the report card is currently in committee at this time being revised because it's recognized as a flawed instrument. And so it does not make sense to use the report card as a reporting mechanism or a metric for EdChoice. Secondly, we would be for promoting the fair funding language that would provide an equal playing field related to the foundation formula. And third, we would insist that all schools, it doesn't matter whether they're public or private, if they're using public funds, that they're held to the same level of accountability standards, both academic and fiscal. So in a nutshell, those are the things that I think most closely align with what we would like to see happen. And some of the versions and proposals that are out there mention those things.
And I would just add, just an hour ago, I read one of tonight's news clips, indicating the Senate has scheduled 10 dates for a conference committee, anticipating that there will be some movement to reconcile the House and Senate version. My observations over the years have been you have to get close to the deadline to really have the political motivation to make the changes. And hopefully, scheduling these conference committee sessions will accelerate that a little bit prior to the 60-day extension deadline. There are dramatic differences between the Senate and House proposal, whether it's solely an income-based voucher or if it's still tied to students in underperforming school areas. But I think voices are being heard to hopefully limit somewhat the impact on districts such as ours.
This is the legislature that has been found in violation of the Constitution for funding schools, and they continue to not do their job there, and now they are trying to erode public education. And I think it's time for us to start speaking up more loudly.
I read an article last week of someone that published a study or did a study that showed that the children that choose vouchers or have been in vouchers, the far majority of them never attended public schools in the first place and or never even intended to attend public schools, which is very interesting.
Yeah. Any other comments?
I guess it just shows when there's enough pushback, they really rethink things, because there was so much
Right.
frustration from parents and school district people and all of the professional associations. So I'm glad we took our own steps toward
Yeah.
that.
Okay, next on the agenda, Board of Education, Chief Financial Officer's report and recommendations. Mr. Wilson.
Yes, I recommend approval of agenda items 7A through 7F as presented.
So moved.
Second?
Please
Relatively normal month for as far as financial performance and relatively normal activities in the other resolutions.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Tuttle?
Yes.
Mrs. Briner?
Yes.
Ms. Jisling?
Yes.
Mrs. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Buckley?
Yes.
And I would recommend the Board of Education approve the district liability, fleet, and property and casualty insurance renewals as presented in agenda item 8-G.
So moved.
Second.
Second?
And I would note that this year we have a 6.8% increase, which translates into $23,395. That came about as a result of three reasons. One is our claim experience. The second is an increased value in our property that is being insured. And the third is the property and casualty industry is accelerating rate renewal increases or increasing the renewals above the inflation rate. We did go into the marketplace to test our current providers. We were able to leverage that to remain with both Wright Specialty and Marco Insurance, and also with Evolve MGA for our cyber liability insurance.
I didn't think that was bad, Dan. I thought that was very reasonable.
Good, thank you.
6.8% increase, is that what you said?
6.8, yes.
Reasonable.
Do you want to call the roll? We need to vote.
Yes.
In my house.
Ms. Jisling?
Yes.
Mr. Tuttle?
Yes.
Mrs. Briner?
Yes.
Mrs. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Buckley?
Yes.
That completes my items this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Any unfinished business? New business? It's now time for hearing on the public on any issue that you'd like to speak to the board. Hearing none, we are going to move into executive session to discuss sale of real estate. Need a motion. We don't anticipate when we come back voting on anything, but you're all welcome to stay.
So moved.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Mrs. Briner?
Yes.
Ms. Jisling?
Yes.
Mrs. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Tuttle?
Yes.
Mr. Buckley?
Yes. Executive session.